Right, so welcome to episode number 1.
Number 1.
Yeah, number 1.
Who thought we'd ever get there?
I thought it was only fitting for our first episode to kind of start off and kind of put the theme of our podcast to talk about relationships with our parents/fathers.
Yeah. Okay.
Would you like to start?
Well, I can be very short in a sense, in that in some respects I don't think I had much of a relationship with my father. Certainly when I was a child growing up, I kind of felt I never really knew my father. We didn't have much in the way of conversation. I have no memory whatsoever of playing with my father as a child. And I think in part it's probably because in the household in which I grew up, although you never knew your grandmother on that side of the family, my mother dominated the family and the family life. And so everything kind of went via her as a conduit, which meant that my father didn't really get much of a look in. And it wasn't really, thinking about it in retrospect, it was only when my mother died that I established something that would be closer to a relationship with my father, for the simple fact that you could actually have time with him without my mother monopolizing the conversation.
But would you say that that was a thing of the time? Like, did most of your friends growing up also not have relationships with their
No,
father?
Again, it's very difficult to generalize. If one is to generalize, then maybe it was a feature of the time that children had less of a relationship with fathers. But I think my situation, just thinking about the situation with my friends, was probably different in that, I grew up in a family where my mother really just dominated the landscape in many ways. So, my father became a relatively solitary figure in that regard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I knew Granddad, and he was quite quiet. He wasn't very
Well, you knew him, of course, after what would have been your grandmother died, and he was. If you thought he was quiet, he was much more animated then than he was when my mother was alive.
I do always wonder though, because they are a different generation that went through war and stuff, and I don't know. I always.
Yeah, it was interesting because he never really talked about himself very much. He didn't.
Yeah.
He wasn't comfortable talking about
No,
himself.
because I always wanted to know. I was like, oh, but I didn't even really know that he lived the war until you kind of said so, and I was like,
Yeah,
oh my god, how come you've never said this? Like,
and he would never
I
volunteer.
didn't know he was married before.
That's right.
I didn't know this.
Oh, I didn't even know he had been married, but prior to my mother, until I was like 18 or so. Actually, it was actually after my mother died. In fact, it was the day of her funeral. This is really extraordinary. On the day of my funeral.
Not your funeral, your
Sorry,
mother's funeral.
my mother's funeral. Gosh, that'd be a bit spooky. I'm just speaking from the grave. I stayed with my father. Obviously, I didn't want him to be alone. And he picked up, in fact, it was that dish over there. He said, "This is the only thing I have left from my first marriage." And he's just like, "What?" It was a muffin dish, actually. And he said,
The Muffin Man?
"A muffin man. Do you know the Muffin Man?"
The Muffin Man?
Yes, the Muffin Man. Well, apparently he had a dish from the Muffin Man, and this was apparently the only wedding present he had left from his first marriage. And that's the only time he ever talked to me about it.
Well, I think funny thing you say that. I feel like I found out things that I didn't know at his funeral. Because, you have like the speech
the oratory.
before, and I was like, why did I not know any of this?
No, well, I guess, again, probably because this never came up into conversation. I mean, I didn't know he'd been married before, but because my mother had told me, as I say, when I was around about 18. But he didn't,
say
anything at all.
Maybe it was a sore topic not to be discussed.
I don't know. I mean, it was quite a she died in, shall we say, quite tragic circumstances. She had a brain tumour, and she died very shortly after they were married. I think they were married, less than a year or something like that. I don't know the precise details. And maybe he just suppressed it, if you like. I don't know. Maybe he just suppressed it.
Maybe that also designed him for his second marriage, if that makes sense. I think maybe, I don't know. As I said, I don't know, so I wouldn't be able to assume that, that was the love of his life and he was heartbroken, and then, because of the time he had to get married again and what have you, but he was still heartbroken. I don't know, but I could make up that kind of story in my brain and kind of explain some behaviour.
But it wasn't as though, I can understand maybe somebody suppressing something like that they're just not comfortable talking about it. But it was very difficult to physically have a conversation with him. It's as though you felt that you were doing all the running. It was as though it didn't really come natural to him. It was only after my mother died that I would go off to cricket matches with him. We did do some of it before my mother died, but primarily after my mother died, I would go because he was he liked watching cricket, and I would, when I had time, I would go and watch a cricket match with him. And I know you're not meant to, be talking the whole time when the cricket's going on, but it was just generally difficult, to get him talking about things. It was almost as though once you'd greeted one another, he'd ask you, what are you doing?
The basics.
And you've gone through the basics. It was just like, that's it, run out of conversation.
But maybe that has to do with his relationship with his parents.
Could well be.
Anything about
Could
that?
well be. Good question. Not a lot. His father died. What would have been my paternal grandfather. Died before I was born. So I never knew my paternal grandfather at all. I don't think they had much of a relationship. Again, I hear stories about my paternal grandfather. At one level, he was a well-loved man, but he was a drunk. Spent a lot of money essentially just indulging himself. And of course, they had a big family. My father had, getting on for, I should know this off by heart, and I don't, but something like 9 siblings. I think he was like
but
one.
Again, that was of the time.
He was one
so
of
how
10.
do you have a time, if you have this many kids, how do you have time to have a good relationship?
Well, that's the whole point. And in some respects, maybe the relationship was much more with the siblings
Because
than
what
with
my
the
other
parents.
question was going to be was, I think a lot of people model their own parenting out of their own relationship with their parents.
Well,
So they either go the opposite way or the exact same.
that kind of makes sense, because to a certain extent, that is, what else do they have to model it on, if you see? To a certain extent, you can say, I didn't have a good relationship with my parents. I'm going to, as you say, go the opposite direction. I'm going to try and do something radically different. So last thing I want is a relationship like that. Or you think, well, it was fine when I was growing up. Why do anything different? You stick with what you know. I don't know. I would like to think the relationship I have with you is so completely and utterly, it's almost polar opposites with the relationship I have with my father. And the fact that we're doing this, he would just be so uncomfortable.
But I would have to say, though, that I don't think it always was, though. I think it's gradually as I've grown older.
Yeah.
And I think that, because I feel like there was a point when I didn't feel comfortable speaking English.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that was a struggle for me, because I was like, but my dad doesn't speak Greek, but I don't feel comfortable speaking English.
Yeah. And I kind of felt that sometimes. And I sometimes get a little frustrated that you would not joining in with certain things and what have you. And I perhaps underestimated the extent to which language was a barrier.
Yeah. I think it's just a certain age. I don't know if it's like when you start, I don't know, hanging out with other children and socializing, and you kind of realize that language is the way to communicate at this point. Because I know that when I was young, for example, one of my first friends, we used to play and I would speak to her in English and she would speak to me in Greek, and there'd be no problem.
Right.
And we'd play all day.
Well, children seem to have this knack of being able to communicate regardless
you go
of their
on
mother
holidays
tongue.
and that's what I mean. So I wonder if it's that kind of age where language does become a problem for communication.
Yeah, and then you suddenly realise that, after having done that for quite a while as a small child, then all of a sudden it was just like, oh, hang on a minute.
Yeah.
This is more complicated than I thought.
Yeah. And then I do think that there was times, because I didn't see you so often, I'd be like, oh my God, but what do I have to say? I don't know what to say. What do I fit? Like, it's been 3 months. What do you say from stuff that's happened 3 months ago? Because both lives kind of move on.
Yeah.
And then it's just like, I'm not too sure what I'm to do here.
Well, it's very simple. You ask about the weather. It's terrible weather we've been having, isn't it? Yes.
But I feel like as
very
I'm
mild
older,
for this time of year.
And then that's why, because I think especially then as a teenager, obviously you go a bit of, teenage angst.
Yeah, and also a little inwardly looking as well,
Yeah.
perhaps.
So I think at some point when I was 14, 15, I said, oh, we should talk once a week or something, and we had weekly phone calls because I felt that I was like, I don't. Because
also you didn't
like
talking on the phone that much when you were younger.
No, but then I think I went through a phase. I was like, yeah, but he doesn't know anything about my school life. Like, there's so much happening. As a teenager, you're having all these new things, new friends, new feelings, and all of this. And then I was like, yeah, but he doesn't know any of this. He doesn't know me. When you're a teenager, you're like, no one understands me. No one knows me.
and it's interesting that you say that. But, I mean, again, from my perspective, when I had all of that going on in my life, similar age, you were talking about my father. My father had no idea what was going on. He did. To be honest, I don't think he knew what subjects I was studying. He didn't know whether I had a girlfriend or not. He had no. I don't think it's not that he just didn't even know. He had no interest in knowing. Mm-hmm. And I think that was one of the things that annoyed me. And my mother, because I would see her physically more often, would be asking kind of questions. Oh, is that? Well, who's that girl, and that kind of thing, or what have you. But also, you see, I know, our example is perhaps a little extreme, because we'd often go, as you rightly say, 3 months without seeing one another. But, my father was also one of these people who got up, left for work in the morning before I went to school, would be out all day because he would go up to London on the train, and then come back, and essentially we would then all sit down and eat together. Maybe a bit of conversation around the dinner table in the evening. And then he would sit down in his chair in the sitting room and smoke his pipe and read his paper. And so you only literally saw him. And then depending on what age it was, it'd be time for bed anyway. So you actually only saw him, sometimes 2 or 3 hours a day.
But I do think at the time, I assume, a father's job was to provide for the family.
Yeah, and he saw that as his responsibility, undoubtedly so.
So he's like, I'm working all day, I'm tired, this is my me time to come home, read the paper. This is what I do as a father. I'm providing for
I think
you.
he definitely had those stereotype notions.
Yeah.
Because, again, one of the things that my mother said to me, I don't know how true it is, but she always said, I remember once she said, I regret never working. What she meant by that, she actually worked every damn day of her life, raising a family and cooking and cleaning and all these things. What she meant is actually having like a paid employment job. And I said, well, why didn't you get one? She said, oh, your father would never have let me. Said he would never have let me.
Yeah, so they had those kind of rules, like he's the man of the house, he's providing, and as the woman, you're the housewife, and this is what you do.
Yeah.
You buy the groceries, you cook the food, you clean the house, and I give you the money for it, sort of thing. Which I think is of the time. So
Yeah, and very difficult, for my mother. I mean, she threw herself into what you might call the community of where we lived. So, her work became a lot of what you might call social and charity work, always organising, church fetes and jumper sales and cubs and scouts and, you name it, anything that was, to do with that kind of aspect of community work. She was in there doing it, baking cakes to sell at coffee mornings and God knows what. It's washing the choir surplices.
So I think to sum up, you didn't have a very close relationship with your father.
Well, later on in life, we became closer, but certainly as a child.
But that's I think one of the reasons I wanted to start this is because why is it always later on?
Possibly because you have more time, don't forget. It's not, when my father was retired, he had, that's when he, quote, suddenly had time for his children.
Yeah, so it's kind of the same for me to say if coronavirus didn't happen and I would have had my plans, whether it be moving out by myself, have a job, we wouldn't have had the time necessarily to have all these months where we've actually
No, and that's been obviously
closer.
one of the bonuses, an unexpected bonus of lockdown for us, that we've had a relationship to a certain extent that we've been denied.
Yeah. Because, yeah, and this is my one question. Because obviously, most of the time I spent with mum, but with mum, I'd say we have a very close relationship to the point where I tell her, like, pretty much everything that would happen at school and, I don't know, gossip and friend problems and stuff like that. To what extent did she share any of that with you?
She shared some of it. Curiously, it was more the negative she would share than the positive. What I mean by that is that you probably were never aware of this. She would sometimes phone me up and say, "Oh, I'm worried because such and such has happened at school, or she's not happy about this, or So it was. I got all of the kind of angst conversations rather than the.
But that's because probably that's what she needed assistance and help with.
Yeah,
That makes
possibly.
sense.
Possibly. But I got to hear about the problems in that respect.
Yeah, which is why I think at some point I was like, okay, maybe we should talk more because then you won't just hear about my grades, my this, my that, and that's pretty much
Yeah,
it.
but it also works the other way in that, you knew very little about what I did at work and possibly still do.
Well, that's what was. I think that's what I kind of realized. I was like, yeah, but I don't know. Like, I come to the UK and I don't know I hear all these things that I know nothing about. I see these people I know nothing about. Like, what? I think it was especially when you moved, and I was like, what is this? I don't know any of these things. Like, I wasn't here, so it's like, it's like life's going on while my life's going on, but somehow they're connected, but they're also not, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, and that's right. And to a certain extent, also don't forget that, a lot of the time we spent together was abnormal. We would deliberately have a holiday together or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
So I would often not be working, and we might go somewhere completely different anyway. So you often knew very little about anything to do with my day-to-day life, and maybe I just kept that from you, and maybe it was a mistake. I don't know, but that's because we had so little time together. I kind of wanted somehow for that to be
holidays.
good time. Not holidays, but just special and so we did a lot together. But did we really know each other? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm kind of like wondering. Because it's not like you knew a lot of my teachers until.
Oh, well, I barely knew your teachers.
Yeah. And I wouldn't
remember
often say,
Fiona.
oh, this happened and this
Fiona.
happened. Yeah, but you only remember it because of the Shrek reference.
Well, yeah, but yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah, I think it's strange in a way. I don't know if it's a gender thing or a generational thing, seeing the difference between your relationship with your father and then mine with mine, or if it's a gender thing that means that, gradually with age, maybe girls feel a bit uncomfortable with.
Well, there's a problem, I think, of comparing my relationship with you and my relationship with my own father. Is that I lived from the ages of 0 to 18 in the same house as my father every day of the week.
We have different variables. There's a lot of different variables.
And we didn't, you see. So I had the opportunity to know my father arguably in a different way. We didn't have the opportunity for whatever reason, and we had to take what we had. And I think it's because of that slightly surreal situation where we didn't see people on a day-to-day basis. I didn't see you coming home in a paddy because you just had a bad lesson or whatever. You didn't see me coming home from work where I'd had a bad day.
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean?
Well, I think that's what it was always like, normally good stuff.
Yeah. And so in that sense, it is a bit of an abstract relationship.
And I'd say especially, I think until uni and maybe last years of school, I wouldn't tell you any like bad stuff from school.
No, but again, I wouldn't tell you necessarily bad things from work. Who wants to pollute their child? We're telling them all about the crap in their life.
Yeah, but that is very common.
So we hide things from our children anyway, I'm quite sure, and vice versa, obviously.
Yeah, but I do think that it is quite common, though, if you live in the same household, that the kid will overhear or, over dinner or something.
Yeah, you're probably right.
Kids overhear the parents' phone calls and stuff when they're young. I know I did.
You mean you used to eavesdrop on your mother and father?
Of course you kind of do. Especially as well, not always, but, you listen, you're not...
Right.
So you kind of know what's...
Oh,
or you think you know what's happening. I mean, I wouldn't do it now, but I'm just saying, like, I feel like I knew what Mum was doing at work most of the time.
Right. Yeah, but you were with her every day, that's my point.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So maybe that's what it is.
But we still all, I think, well, I'm sure
Whereas now you discuss work stuff with me, which you wouldn't have done before. And I discussed university stuff with you at the time. And which for me was like a big thing, because I would never talk to you about boy stuff or friend stuff.
Yeah.
Very, very rarely, which is why I kind of asked. I didn't know if Mum would say stuff to you or if anyone else
Not so much about that, no.
Because I know that some of your friends would kind of ask me, and I'd think,
oh, I know,
and
they'd be
snitch
fishing
on me.
Yeah, they would be fishing.
And then you're going to go and tell my dad.
But that also pissed me off a bit, I have to say, because, I mean, as you know, one of our friends, I can imagine which one, would, try and say, and having to see, have you got a boyfriend yet? And have you whatever?
Yeah.
And I was and when they told me about that, I was actually quite angry because my reaction was that she would think, oh, well, that's me trying to get information from you indirectly, which wasn't the case at all. It was just like, well, and it's none of your bloody business.
Yeah.
If she wants to have that conversation with me, that's up to me.
Yeah.
No, I can imagine. But no, I was never trying to spy on you third hand, if that's what you mean.
Well, I don't know, because that's the thing. Like with Mum, I wouldn't even necessarily hide stuff from her. I'd just like blurt stuff out. There wouldn't really be...
Yeah.
Whereas with you, I'd always be like, oh, I don't know. I don't know what's the thing is with girls talking about boys or their friends with their dads. But I know I have friends that feel more confident doing that with their dads rather than their mums.
Essentially, you say more confident. So does that mean that you were not confident talking about that for me?
Well,
You're
no, I
worried.
couldn't talk to you about boys.
Why? Because you think I'm just going to be hypercritical? Or...
I don't know. I was just like a big no-no. I don't know how
But
I
why?
got that idea.
But what? Yeah, but you got it from somewhere.
I don't know. I think it's a good topic for another
Yeah,
podcast to see
'cause
why do girls not talk about their boyfriends to their dads, and why do dads why are they so hypercritical of boyfriends? I think there's this stereotype that they're just gonna automatically hate them. So
well,
I
I think it
wouldn't
probably
reference
also
a boy unless I knew it was very serious.
I think it possibly works the other way around as well. In that I think, sorry, what I'm trying to say is that boys don't necessarily talk about their girlfriends to their mothers.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know what it is about, but there is that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that really is going to be the next topic, because otherwise we're going to be talking for, gosh, another half an hour, and I think the podcast won't sustain that.
Yeah, I think that's a good topic.
That's a cliffhanger. That's a
Cliffhanger for what is
moment
to come
here.
Next episode.
Well, if you want to hear about all of her boyfriends, you've just got to listen to the next podcast, I reckon.
So yeah, interesting to see what different relationships and how they kind of grow between fathers and maybe we should have one about mothers. I don't know.
Well, I've mentioned my
Since
mother
they
quite a bit,
differ
and
so
again,
much.
that's another set. But as I say, I said that she dominated the landscape of the household.
So you would say you didn't know your father so well?
No, I didn't know. I really.
I would say, to kind of sum it up, because we are running out of time. Okay, you didn't have a close relationship with your father, and I would say that our relationship has been getting closer with age. It wasn't obviously as bad, or not bad, in quotations, bad, distant than yours was with your father, but I think as I'm growing as well, we're both putting in more effort.
Effort, that's it. It all requires effort.
Yeah, relationship need a kind of, balance of both people putting in effort and time.
Yeah.
Because I think if it's one-sided, sometimes, for me at least, I get a bit, I don't know, I get fed up. I'm like, at the end of I think especially with parents, I don't know if it's just me, but I'm more of the opinion of like, you're my parent. I shouldn't be the one trying so hard to have a relationship with you. That's your responsibility as my parent.
But as you get older, I think it becomes more of a shared responsibility.
Yeah, because then you're closer in that.
But what I will say, and I know we should really look to wrap this up, I feel, and you can criticize me as a father, I'm quite happy for you to do so, but I feel that I actually did, when you were growing up, do an awful lot with you that I couldn't imagine doing with my father. So, teaching you how to ride, teaching you how to swim, just generally,
Activities.
doing things with you.
Yeah. No, I don't disagree. I think it's way more.
And I'm not saying that, in a sense that's peripheral. Relationships are deeper than just simply doing stuff and to get together. No, but I think
it definitely helps to actually do stuff. I think it creates a bond, but then I think it needs something else. Like, how do you then have a relationship without doing stuff?
Sure.
I think that's what lockdown kind of helped with. It's like, okay, but what do we talk about when we're not doing something?
Well, what we became people who were living together.
Yeah.
In that sense, where that requires a very different kind of relationship.
Yeah. I have one funny story that I'm just going to end it with. I don't know if it was last Christmas or the Christmas before, but I had this kind of idea. I got a really nasty cold.
Yes.
And I think it was, and you were like making soup or something, and I thought to myself, this is the first time I've been sick with my dad looking after me rather than my mum.
Oh, well, there we go. That's what it all comes down to. You just want to be sick with your father.
No.
Or sick over your father.
But I don't know if you felt the same way, that you've never like had to look after me in that kind of context. Obviously, I was older, so I didn't have to be babied. But
I've wiped your ass several times. I don't know where you're drawing the line of looking after here.
Right. Okay. Okay.
Metaphorically and physically. I think we should end it at that point.
I was just trying to say something sweet. I was just trying to, I don't know. Fine. First time that I actually like remember, because obviously, yes, you looked after me when I was really, really young. But, you know, after I was 10 years old plus, I don't remember being sick.
Well, possibly because you wouldn't have been able to travel if you were sick. But yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I was just trying to say a fond moment and thought that I had, but you've ruined it. So I think we should end it here.
Okay. I'll forget wiping your ass.
Bye. Thanks for listening.
Bye.